After serving time in prison, Myatt now lives in Staffordshire, in England, with his wife. He was the artist creating new works in the style of famous masters like Van Gogh, Matisse and Monet to Drew's orders. Myatt started innocently enough, painting so-called genuine fakes for ordinary people who just wanted to have a nice Giacometti above their mantelpiece, until he met his partner in crime.
Yeah, a man called, it was a very nice man called Mr. John Drew, and we became good friends for a year. He worked as a normal customer. I worked, I must have done him about 10 paintings for £250 each. Normally, I think most people had 2 or 3 paintings, but this one particular person had painting after painting after painting after painting, and it was quite strange actually, but he was a good customer, and his checks didn't bounce, so I was very happy with that. And as he got to know me better, I suppose he found out about my domestic circumstances, how things were at home, and he called up one day and said, "Look, that painting you just sold me for £250. I took it down to Christie's last week, and they valued it at £25,000.
This was the start of a brilliant criminal career. 15% of Myatt's works were fake Giacomettis. Some sources claim that more than half of all the Giacomettis in the world are forged.
The Giacometti nude here would be possibly about 100 to 120, 130,000 pounds, something like that. I'll sell that for much less than that. In fact, I think these Giacomettis I'm doing now are actually better than the Giacomettis I was doing when I was forging them. The quality is much better now. I never did exact copies. I don't think there's any point in doing. I mean, any fool can do that, really. What I did was I looked at the artist that I was interested in, and I looked at the problems that they were looking at in, say, 1920, 1930, 1940, and I painted another painting, created a new painting that could have come from that artist in that time. So they were totally new works. I didn't copy anything. I mean, if we were just coming up with copies of paintings, everybody would say, well, that's a copy of one that's already on the market. I mean, artists don't work like that. No, you had to come up with a new, visually new thing each time. Didn't always work, but quite often it was a good move.
The stupefying thing was, Myatt was creating these artworks with ordinary house paint, and nobody noticed.
I still use the same kind of paint as I used then, which is house paint. I use just house paint here, and I mix it with acrylic paint. I don't use oil paint until the very end. Sometimes I'll finish off with oil paint just to find out if I want depth of colour. But I don't like the smell of oil paint. It makes me kind of, so I prefer to use this kind of paint.
Myatt churned out one DIY masterpiece after another, and the art world literally bought it.
Yeah, I was very surprised. I really was surprised by that. It just seemed so unbelievable, really.
It was the genius of Myatt's partner, John Drew, who's disappeared without a trace since being released from prison, that made all of this possible. Myatt's artistic talents were indispensable to the venture, but in order to sell paintings in today's market, you need more than just a good eye. Drew managed to sell some of Myatt's works for hundreds of thousands of pounds at auction houses like Sotheby's and to museums like the Tate and the Victoria and Albert in London. How? He faked their papers, their provenance, to create false evidence that Myatt's paintings were genuine. The policeman who put Drew and Myatt behind bars, Mickey Volpe, is still impressed by Drew's ingenuity.
Mr. Drew managed to ingratiate himself with certain people at a number of institutions, including the Tate and including the V&A in London. With regard to the Tate Gallery, he even made a donation. So he became a benefactor of the Tate, which obviously at the time they thought was genuine. But of course, the motive behind it was that having become a benefactor and having become very well known at the Tate, he was then given access to some of the archive material that he was particularly interested in.
According to John Myatt, Drew had a variety of techniques to fool his customers.
As far as I can tell you, the paintings would come down from my house, and then he would actually make the stretchers, change the stretchers of the paintings, so they were old stretchers. Change the tacks, little tacks in the side, dip them in salty water so they'd go rusty. I think someone told me that he actually emptied the vacuum cleaner in so there's bits of dust gets in the corner, and all this straightforward stuff really. Not exactly rocket science, but it did make a new thing look like an old thing.
Instant coffee is perfect for instant ageing.
Well, the stronger the coffee, the darker the mixture of coffee, the more it will actually pick up these little tiny bits of grain texture of the canvas as it runs down the surface of the painting. I do it when a customer asks me to. Sometimes I've painted things and they've said it's very good, but it looks new. And there are a variety of ways you can put coloured varnish on. I mean that's we're knocking something down. I prefer not to do it if I can get away with not doing it. But people like it. People want it. If you're trying to persuade your friends you've got a Braque from 1910 on the wall, it's got to look 90 years old, doesn't it?
Policeman Mickey Volpe's convinced that many people have fake art hanging on their walls. If museums and auction houses can't tell the difference, how can you? And if you did, would you come clean?
It is probably the case that there are many paintings that are still out there that we have not recovered, and it may well be the case that there are private people who have been duped and conned, have paid their good money for a Myatt painting, and maybe because of their own self-respect, they don't really want everybody to know that they were conned or duped.
John Myatt seems well over his time in prison. He's no longer in touch with Drew and makes a living doing what he does best, painting. Only these days he confesses that his works are fakes. Despite no longer passing off copies as the genuine article, he still can't understand what all the fuss was about.
It is the only crime I can think of where there are no victims. If you think about it, if it had worked properly and the painting was sold for an amount of money, it would then have developed a life of its own and would just have gone on into the future, changing hands as they do for years to come, and no one would have lost any money.